I found this microwave in my neighbor's garbage can, so I took it home and turned it into an AC stick welder. In this project, we'll be testing out this contraption to see if it actually works, because if it does, we'll have the metal welding power to make a puzzle for entertaining guests or build improvised weapons for a zombie apocalypse. I just modified these microwave oven transformers to weld metal and made a little container for it all to fit into. This arc welder is finished and ready for testing, so to do that, I got some pieces of scrap metal from a welding shop down the road. I switched out the blade on my chop saw with this cutting wheel, and I'm cutting these bits of steel into smaller pieces. The sparks are pretty hot and fly everywhere, so it's important to wear protection and keep them away from anything flammable. Okay, our pieces are cut and resting on this larger piece of metal. This is going to act as a base plate for the ground clip to connect to. I've got a 6013 welding rod that gets clipped into the stinger, and the amperage is controlled with this device I call the Scariac. Look for how to build this in another video. The amps are adjusted to work with these 16th-inch cellulose-coated rods, and with two of our pieces butted up next to each other, it's time to see if we can strike an arc. They say it's kind of like striking a match, and there we go. These welding rods are consumable, meaning they get used up in the weld. You can actually see where the end of the rod turns to molten metal and pools into the joint. To give this a little more strength, let's flip it over and do the same thing to the top side. The UV radiation from stick welding is enough to give you a pretty bad sunburn, so if you try it, make sure you're protected from head to toe. Alright, the weld is cooled, so now we can knock off the layer of slag that's formed on the top, then clean it up with a wire brush. Now it looks good to me, but I've never really welded before, so I'm not sure how to tell if the weld is good or not. So let's break it. The piece gets clamped in a bench vise, and these channel lock pliers should give us the leverage we need. I'm actually expecting this will snap in the middle, but it didn't. I welded another piece and tried bending it back and forth multiple times to snap the weld, but the joint never broke. Just for fun and a bit more practice, let's weld all the scrap pieces together. I've also got these framing nails we can tack on in random places, and a link of galvanized chain we can weld to the end. Well, I think it's safe to say this welder is working, and I've got my first piece of metal art to prove it. It's a little rough, and probably not the kind of decor I'd want to put on display, but in a weird way, I kinda like it. Now I'm amazed that even with all this welding, the transformer coils are only slightly warm to the touch. I tried welding some larger 332 rods, and that was a different story. They work alright, but the welder heats up fast. To cool it down, I have a fan that was salvaged from one of the microwaves, and it slides right up to the vent hole on the left. When it's turned on, air flows over the transformer coils and exhausts out the other side. In the case of extreme overheating, the whole top lifts right off for maximum ventilation. This welds metal pretty good in my opinion, but I took it to another welder to get his thoughts on how it worked. He tried some welds on pieces of his own scrap steel, and seemed pretty impressed with the results. He said the weld penetrated the metal completely and probably wouldn't break. So we tried some more destructive testing to break the weld, but even with good leverage and quite a bit of force, the weld held strong and the metal broke first. To finish this project up, let's try making something a little more useful. This time I've got a horseshoe and some chain, and I'm welding the links in line with the tips of the shoe. This 2-inch steel ring goes over both of the chains, and the remaining links are welded onto another shoe. We can clean up the welds in the usual way, and look at that! We've got a horseshoe puzzle ready for entertaining. The challenge is to get the ring off, which seems impossible because the ring is way too small. But it can be done, and my wife just proved it. Why don't you make your own and see if you can figure out how it's done? Well, there's a Mott stick welder that works, and my first few experiences with the world of welding. If you like this project, perhaps you'll like some of my others. Check them out at thekingofrandom.com.